Todd, I'm really excited that you're here today to talk a little bit about accidental creative, about doing your best creative work. And I'm really excited to have you here in Indianapolis next Thursday, where we're going to be doing the Finding Your Voice event. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to being in Indy. I kind of feel like Indy is my second home because I spend a lot of time. I'm based in Cincinnati, right? So I spend a lot of time on I-74. There's not a lot between, right? It's a lot of downtime to think. So I love that drive between Cincy and Indy, but I'm looking forward to being there.
Yeah, there's like the black hole of cell phone reception there.
That's right. That's right. There is like a 5-mile window where it's like you can't possibly be interrupted for anything because there's no cell phone reception whatsoever. Yeah,
well, that's a good thinking time. Well, speaking of thinking, Accidental Creative was a book that you wrote and has become kind of like your movement. And I know you've got another book you're working on, so I want to make sure we touch on that too. But the concept that I really I love from the Accidental Creative was this concept of kind of dying empty, and I wanted to kind of touch on that. And if you could just give us maybe like the elevator pitch of that whole concept.
Yeah, so my biggest concern that I'm finding is I spend a lot of time with organizations, and especially even, and we'll just frame it up as people who are in this kind of startup culture, right? Or people who are trying to do their best work every day, is that what can happen over time is that we, rather than determining the work that needs to be done and defining that work and then working towards some end objective and making sure that we're structuring our life so we're getting our best work out of us every day, instead we get carried along by the work. And it's easy to lose yourself when things are crazy, when things are busy. It's easy to lose yourself in the work. And so that whole concept of dying empty is fundamentally about making sure that you understand what's important to you, making sure that you've defined the battles that you're trying to fight every day, and then structuring your life and your workload and the way that you approach your projects and the way that you structure your work around moving toward those objectives. So that's kind of it's funny, you kind of started with the punchline of the book, which is at the end, if you build structure into your life to help you deal with your work better on a consistent basis, then you'll find that you have more capacity to think about deeper questions like, why am I doing this to begin with? And what do I really want to accomplish? What is the delta that will exist because I engaged my work, right, over the course of my life? And, those are some of the deeper questions that, unfortunately, Matt, often get lost in the fray of day-to-day work, as we're kind of being carried along by what's expected of us.
After you kind of define that why are you doing what you're doing, what are some of the next steps that an entrepreneur or creative person can take to leave it all on the floor, to die empty?
Yeah, so this is really kind of the core of the book, The Accidental Creative, and I'm gonna take all of this kind of to another level when we talk at the Verge event, because the fundamental question at that event is, how do you find your voice, right? So what is the jumping off point then for determining what is that intersection of my passions, my skills, my experiences that is kind of my sweet spot? So I'm gonna be really focusing on that at the event. But once you've kind of determined, you've established, here's what I want to do, there are really 5 key areas that you need to be cognizant of in order to make sure that you're doing your best work every day and to position you to be what I call prolific, brilliant, and healthy, right? That's kind of the trifecta. You want to be prolific, meaning you're doing great work, or you're doing a lot of work, because we have to do that, most of us. You want to be brilliant, meaning you're doing good work, and you want to be healthy, meaning you're doing it in a sustainable way, because it does you no good to be prolific and brilliant, but not to be able to sustain that, right, over the long term. And I see so many people, especially people in their 20s, that come out of the gates and they say, hey, this is great, I'm going to take on the world. And by the time they're 32, they're fried, and they're still doing good work, but deep down they know that they've sacrificed their best work because they weren't cognizant of how they were going to sustain that pace over the long term. So there are kind of 5 areas that you need to be aware of to help you be prolific, brilliant, and healthy. The first is focus. And focus is how you define your work. It's important to be able to understand, not just conceptually, here are the projects that I'm doing, but what problems am I really trying to solve through this work? Your mind is wonderful at solving problems, but you have to do the pre-work of defining those problems that you want your mind to be working on, right? So the more specific you can get about the problems you're trying to solve, the better you set yourself up. And I see this a lot in organizations, people being carried along from day to day to day by their work, and they haven't stopped to ask the question, has the problem we're trying to solve here changed as a result of our work? And this is, typical in startup culture, especially, right? When you've got something new going on, you've got an idea, and you're working, and you don't stop long enough to realize, wait a minute, we're actually solving a different problem now, because you're so obsessed with the original problem you were trying to solve. And so anyway, focus is critical. The second area that you need to work on is relationships. There's a real tendency when you're doing, especially conceptual work, you're turning your thoughts into value. There's a real tendency to isolate yourself. And because, a lot of creative work is done in isolation. There's a lot of thought time involved, and it's easy to become segmented off from other people. But innovation is the collective grasp for the next. We need other people. We need their insight. We need their perspectives, especially if they have a different perspective from us. You have to be purposeful about building relationships in your life with collaborators, conspirators, people that are working on similar problems, so that you can, as Stephen Johnson, who wrote Where Good Ideas Come From, talked about, he said, we need to pursue the adjacent possible together, right? Which is a term he borrowed from evolutionary biology, but we need to pursue the adjacent possible together. The third area is energy management. We tend to think that if we have the time available that we can do something, but the reality is there's an invisible component, which is energy. We sometimes have the time, so we stack meeting after meeting after meeting. We get to the end of the day, Matt, and we need an idea in a meeting. We have nothing left to give because we're completely fried. We haven't been managing our energy effectively. So you have to manage energy in order to bring your best work every day. The fourth area is what I call stimuli. And stimuli are all the things that float in your environment, the things you've read, the things you've experienced, conversations you've had. All of those things become fodder for your creative process, and you can smash them together and mash them together to form something new. But some of us are less than purposeful about the kinds of stimuli that we allow into our world. Right? Not everybody's sitting around listening to interviews by Matt, right? Which is great stimuli. But some people are less than purposeful. Maybe surfing the YouTube and do whatever. And it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to also be purposeful about putting things into your head that are higher quality stimuli that challenge you to see the world in new ways. And then the final area is hours. And hours are all about where we put our time. And many of us, Matt, unfortunately default to an efficiency mindset with our time rather than an effectiveness mindset, meaning that we do things that give us the ping of productivity, but we fail to do the things that might increase our ability to be more effective tomorrow, the things that increase our capacity, develop our skills, develop our mindset, allow us to pursue our curiosity in a way that isn't immediately practical, but is building our capacity for future effectiveness. So those 5 areas: focus, relationships, energy, stimuli, hours. They spell the acronym FRESH. Thoroughly unintentional, I promise you. Originally, hours was time, and my editor said, right now you have FREST, and FREST is not very memorable. Can we change time to hours? Okay, sure. But that's an easy framework to remember, to think about. You need to be building practices in each of those areas to position you for effectiveness. And then once you have that rhythm in your life, then you find, wow, I've got all of this excess energy, all of this excess capacity to start asking questions like, why? What is my voice? How should I approach my work? Because now you've got the basics covered. Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense to me, and the acronym helps too. I'm a big acronym guy, so that mnemonic will be helpful.
Great.
The thing that I find a lot of times is I'll find these frameworks, whether it's in a book or in a Skype interview, and I'll remember them, and I'll kind of come back to them. But there's always sort of that falling off that happens, right? Just the inevitable thing that happens in life, right? Some big project takes over, or you have this passion, you're going to divert more energy towards that, and you can sort of like fall off the wagon and get pulled out of alignment.
Right.
What are some of the things that you do to find yourself back in that fresh scenario?
Yeah, I think that's what you just described is the exact reason why I wrote the first book, because in the midst of the craziness, everything in our life becomes unstructured. We throw ourselves into the work, and it becomes all about the work and getting the work done. And that would be okay if it's for a season, but the reality is that most of us are living through back-to-back seasons that are exactly like what I just described, right? So we go through a crazy season, we say, well, this is just for a while, and then things will settle down again. But then something else comes up, and we're like, okay, and it's just for a while, and it's, you know, and most of us, that's our work existence. Because let's face it, people are doing more with less. They're being asked to do more with less. And that trend is only increasing. You know, this economic downturn became a great excuse for a lot of companies to lay off a large part of their workforce and consolidate responsibility. And so a lot of people are carrying 1.5 jobs now, if not more. And so it's become really challenging. So the reason that I talk about this infrastructure is because this is the rhythm that undergirds all of that craziness. It's the predictable structure that allows you then to be wild and crazy in your work and to go nuts and to pursue your work with full vigor, because you know you've got this underlying structure that's allowing you to define your work effectively, that's providing you with relational insight and inspiration, that's allowing you to manage your energy so that you don't get too crazy. And one of the things in the energy area that I tend to prescribe to people is the practice of pruning, you know, the importance of pruning. And we are, as creatives, we're terrible at pruning. I mean, absolutely terrible. Always new ideas, always new projects, but we're not good about saying no to things. In a vineyard, that's one of the primary roles of the vine keeper, is to regularly prune new fruit off of the vine. Why would you prune perfectly good fruit off of a vine? Isn't that kind of the goal of the vine? Well, yeah, it is, but the vine keeper knows that if you don't regularly prune that fruit off the vine, eventually it will steal resources from the older, more mature fruit-bearing parts of the vine, because the vine is not capable of sustaining an endless amount of fruit, right? So eventually all of the fruit on the vine will succumb to systemic mediocrity if not pruned. And the same thing happens to us. We're not wired to take on any and every project that comes our way. We have to be selective about saying no, not no forever, but at least no for now to things so we can free up space in our life to be able to engage fully in the things that matter. So to answer your question, having these structures and these practices in place provide the platform that allows you to go nuts, go crazy in your work, because you always have a predictable base to come back to.
That's a really helpful tactic and kind of the overall strategy. And so I'm excited to dive into more of those on Thursday when you come to Indianapolis. Real quick, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your new book, which kind of brings it full circle to what we talked about first, and Die Empty. That's the title, right?
It is, yeah, and it actually, I just finished it up, actually, this week, so it's going off to production. It comes out in September, and I'm super excited about it. I'm really not talking a lot about it, but I'm going to be sharing some of the core principles at the talk in Indy, so I'm excited to do that. It's kind of my coming out party for some of this new content, which is kind of exciting. But, yeah, my concern, my question was, okay, so you do all this, right? You get to this place. What are some of the factors then that can still cause people to succumb to mediocrity? You know, the word mediocrity comes from two words in the original language: medius, which means middle, and ochrus, which means rugged mountain. So to be mediocre literally means, in the original context, to stop halfway up a rugged mountain, right? So why do some people go halfway up the mountain and then stop? And what I've discovered as I've looked at the patterns is that there are kind of some common factors that cause people to get stuck. And they don't do it it's not laziness, it's not incompetence typically. I mean, mediocrity can result from incompetence, right? But everybody is good at something. So what are some of the factors that cause people to slip and to stop halfway up the mountain? And one of those factors, which I'm going to be talking about on Thursday and that I address in the new book, is fear. It's fear of trying things, fear of taking risks, fear of experimenting and finding your voice. And that's really what we're going to be talking about on Thursday, is what are some of the things that cause us to stay in a place of imitation, where we just look at other people and say, well, I'm going to do, you know, what was the first thing people asked when Steve Jobs died? Who's going to be the next Steve Jobs, right? I think he would have found that a profoundly uninteresting question, right? I mean, he doesn't, of all people, like, he would have said, I don't want somebody to be the next me, right? It's crazy. But we as a culture, we tend to do that. We try to emulate these people that we respect and admire, and that's fine as you're in a season of learning skills, building a platform, developing your capacity to engage your work. That's fine, but at some point you have to begin to diverge. You have to begin to experiment, take risks, try new things, apply your own passion, skills, and experiences to the problems that you're experiencing. using that platform that you've built, of course, right? But begin to try to apply your own voice to that. And when people don't do that, when they stay at that place of imitation and they just do the safe thing, the thing that they know works, that's one of the places that people get stuck, and they fail to get their best work out of them. And unfortunately, they take their best work to their grave with them, which is what die empty means, right? I don't want you to take your best work to your grave with you. I want you to get it out in the world because we need you to contribute. You have something unique to offer, and that's not Tony Robbins, Dr. Phil, feel good about yourself. It's true. We need every single person engaged fully and freely with everything they have, with the work that's in front of them. That's how these big problems we're facing in culture are going to get solved. It's not going to get solved by people going to work as drones and slaving away at work that they don't care about. It's going to come from people fully understanding their aptitudes, their voice, their skills, defining their battles, and throwing themselves fully into their work. And so that's what we're going to be talking about, is how do you identify that sweet spot, and then how do you apply it to your work regardless of the work that you're doing.
I think that finding the sweet spot message is something that definitely resonates with our entrepreneurial audience and all the creative folks that are out there. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk a little bit about Die Empty, the new book, and then Accidental Creative, which is a great book. You should go get it if you haven't already. Read it before the Thursday event. But we'll be live streaming there as well, and so hopefully people, if they can't make it in person, I know that there's limited capacity in the event. So if you can't make it as one of those 300, at least be able to tune in and catch some of Todd's message on Thursday. Todd, thanks so much for being here today, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks so much for the great work that you guys are doing in Indianapolis and for startups everywhere. Really appreciate it.